Welcome back, guys. Today's episode, sharing 9 unsettling true tales from abandoned desert highways. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you are from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. 23 years on California's back roads taught me 2 things. The desert keeps its own time, and mile markers don't lie. The numbers are literal bones set into the skin of asphalt survey math turned metal, hammered into place, logged, mapped, and cross-checked. You trust them because out here, with heat shivering off the horizon and nothing but creosote to break the view, sometimes the numbers are the only thing that hold when your own gut starts to drift. It was a Monday edging toward midnight. No moon, the Mojave turned to a flat ocean of charcoal. I'd run County 66 100 times between Kelso and a 2-pump station the map still listed as services. A wind advisory had gone stale on my dash and Devils expected, visibility low. The only movement was my spotlight pulling coyotes' eyes into coins and letting them go again. My thermos coffee had gone coppery. The taste paired with heat that had sunk into the steering wheel and never left. Routine. Until it wasn't. Mile 39 should have been my next friend on the right shoulder green reflective face. White numerals easy as a clock. Instead, my beams caught 41. I eased to the rumble strip and idled. The sign stood at a neat angle, not twisted or vandalized. It belonged, except it didn't. I radioed dispatch. Default calm, Unit 35 confirming position. County 66 eastbound near mile 39, visual on mile 41 sign. Request verify. Oh, pause. 35, your last ping puts you 2 miles behind your stated. Do you have GPS error? I double-checked the unit. Nothing was drifting. And still the big white 41 burned back at me. I chalked it up to a contractor's mistake or my own fatigue, though fatigue doesn't move steel. I rolled forward slow, letting my brights peel the shoulder back. The smell in the cruiser changed, less hot vinyl, more metallic like rebar rain. 50 yards on, red reflectors flashed. A sedan, sun-faded Taurus, nosed toward the eastbound ditch. No plates, driver door cracked. Hood clicking heat like a cricket. I parked at an angle, set flares, and did the textbook walk-up, left hand brushing the trunk, flashlight cone low, gun sight away. CHP, I called. Anyone in the vehicle? The only answer was air sighing through the AC vents. Inside, an old state map unfolded to the desert quadrants, 3 circles drawn around mile 41 in red pencil. Backseat held a little red backpack, a juice box ballooned with heat, and a crumpled class photo stamped room 203. The teacher had scribbled on the map's margin, "Field trip mile 41 petroglyphs." There are no petroglyphs anywhere near County 66, and if there were, they'd be fenced under 3 agencies who don't like sharing. I checked the engine. Warm, not hot like it had been running recently but not driven hard. My radio hissed once, then settled. Coyotes quit talking. Off to my right, gravel skittered like a runner keeping pace in the dark. I snapped my light toward the sound and got nothing, only my own beam-cutting dust. When I turned back to the car, I stopped cold. The Taurus now pointed west. No engine start, no crunch of tires, just the nose where the tail had been. If you think your mind can't take a joke, work nights, it can. But rubber marks don't lie either, and there weren't any. I keyed the PA, telling whoever might be pranking to step out. Then I saw the dash clock ticking backward, 12:11, 12:10. 12:09, I clicked my body cam by force of habit. Inside the backpack I found crayons still waxy, a child's handwriting on a folded permission slip, and a note that kicked me square in the chest. I can't wait to see the drawings on the rocks, Mommy. In the margin, a Roadrunner sticker, peeling, I pulled the map flat on the hood. Someone had traced a route from the school to County 66, then 3 loops at mile 41 like a Target or a Whirlpool. A name was stamped along the bus route, Tri-State Charter number 212. My hand hovered over the radio. I didn't know yet what I was reporting. A wrong sign. An abandoned car. The feeling that the highway had shifted under me like a living thing rolling in its sleep. I defaulted to procedure: request backup, start a grid, secure the scene. The desert around me pressed in with a sound like sugar, pouring sand moving like breath. That was when the wrong mile marker groaned. The post didn't lean. It drifted, as if a giant magnet under the roadbed tugged it forward a few feet. Then a few more, the reflective face scraping metal on sand. I froze, mouth open to a word I don't say on duty. My flares fluttered like fish. Somewhere just out of sight, something small giggled, 3 sharp exhalations. At tape REIND dot, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like the road wanted me somewhere I wasn't. I've had mirages run antelope across the sky, seen wind turn billboards into symbols, and I found lost hikers drinking radiator fluid from a car that wouldn't start. There's always an explanation if you walk backward through the steps slow enough. Always failed me at mile 41. I set the cruiser's spotlight to wash the shoulder and climb the slight berm where the sign had crept. My boots sank a half-inch into powder, the kind of talc that eats tread. Up close, I saw scrape lines running parallel to the road the marker had moved before. Fresh gouges scored the sand in repeating arcs like something testing boundaries, as if the number itself was restless. The night had gone so quiet the tiny fizz of my radio sounded like bacon. Then soft as chalk scritch. Under my beam, chalk lines stretched across the asphalt. Not lane marks. Child height drawings right on the blacktop. 7 stick figures holding hands. A big smiling sun, a boxy bus with square wheels, and at the end of the chain a figure with X for eyes. The chalk squeaked under my boot when I tested it. Fresh, I swept the desert with light-sagging barbed wire. Creosote, low humps of rock. The skittering sound matched my pace again, 30 paces out and exactly 1 step behind whatever direction I'd turn my head. It was no animal. There's a cadence to life out here. Lizard, coyote, hare, each with its own meter. This was shorter, human small, patient. Dispatch 3-5 update, I said, and gave a concise version that made me sound sane. Abandoned vehicle. Possible juvenile indicators, suspicious movement near mile 41. Request an additional unit and county roads to confirm sign placement. The mic stuttered, then replayed my own voice a second later with an odd flattening like a school intercom. Mile 41 request additional. The echo wasn't from the repeater tower. It was too close. I squatted by the chalk bus and killed my handheld light, letting only the spotlight cast its hard rectangle. The heat radiating off the road had a pulse to it on the count of 4. Drop, count of 4, rise like a classroom breath exercise. The Taurus's passenger window wore the faint, oily handprint of a child. 4 fingers, short pinky overlapped as if the kid had slid down glass. I opened the rear door. The smell hit me first: sugar, paper, and the ghost of Orange Cleaner Elementary School. The class photo had names block printed on the back in a teacher's neat hand. 12 kids, 1 teacher. I could see the edges where parents had signed permission. Yes, my child may attend the field trip to mile 41 historical site. Historical site? I've stood on every historical site in this county. 41 isn't one of them. The wind flipped a page on the map still spread over the hood. The 3 red circles over 41 looked like life buoys on a black sea. I traced the bus route with a finger downtown, feeder road. Then County 66, the pencil line stopped at 41, then picked up again 2 miles east, as if the mapmaker had lifted the pencil and lost that space entirely. I looked up. The wrong mile marker gleamed like an eye. My spotlight flickered. Darkness pressed in, syrup thick, then withdrew. I turned the switch back and forth, solid power, no loose wire. The desert, when it wants you, has a way of leaning. This felt like a lean. I felt the taste of copper in my mouth and realized my molar filling had gone hot. A stupid detail to note, except I've only felt that around big magnets. The groan sounded again, metal shivering against sand. The marker inched forward, then stopped as if embarrassed to be caught. Movement at the seam where road meets dirt. I pivoted. Something scuttled, child height, quick, all elbows and shadow, into the halo of my flare and out again. 3 little laughs, bright and wrong. I didn't draw down. You don't draw on a kid. But my hand knew where the holster was. Hey, I said, hating the unevenness in my own voice. Hey, buddy, you okay? CHP, you need help? The dark waited. Somewhere farther off a jackrabbit thumped. A minute lengthened, a bus chime sounded. Not from the highway. From the Taurus. I leaned in. The dead radio blinked to life on an unmarked frequency, no station ID, a woman's voice. Careful and clipped like teachers use when the bus gets too loud, said, "Eyes forward. Room 203, hands to yourself." The hair on my forearms stood up. "Ma'am?" I said to no one visible. "If you can hear me, this is Highway Patrol. If anyone is injured, call out." The radio hissed. Then my name slipped through in a voice I knew from long retirements ago, dispatch Karen. Years dead of a stroke, Officer Lane, and then a squeal like chalk against the wrong board. My spotlight steadied again, this time picking out the line of mile markers stretching away down County 66 for a breath. I swear I saw them shifting, each reflective face sliding to trade places with the next. 39 to 40 to 41 to, like numbered vertebrae trying on positions. The air behind me moved with quick, irregular footfalls, the pitter-pattern of children toward something they shouldn't touch. "You don't want to be here," I heard myself say out loud. To the road, to whoever was giggling, to the wrong number in the right place. It felt less like advice and more like a warning to myself I had already failed to take. I laid 3 cones in a wedge and started a slow reverse toward my unit, keeping eyes on the Taurus, the chalk drawings, the creeping sign. If there's anything a night cop knows, it's this. When the scene wants to dictate your position, change the geometry before it finishes the thought. That was when every flare went out at once snuffed, not blown, and the desert went thick and cold, like a gym right after the power fails and you realize how much your ears had relied on hum. Darkness in the desert is absolute when it wants to be. My cruiser's light bar threw a red-blue pulse that barely dented it, as if the night were a substance instead of absence. In that pulse, the chalk drawings glowed like bones on an X-ray white stick limbs. A square bus and one little figure with X-eyes holding nobody's hand. Something crossed the asphalt fast short. Upright, the size of a first grader, just a ripple in the dark with the same 3-note giggle backward. Like tape spooling? My hand hit my mic, but I didn't broadcast. I didn't want my fear on the record. I swung the spotlight hard. The beam caught the wrong 41 half-turned on its post. The sign's base shivered, shaved, sand humming. It slid again, not much, just enough to prove intent. "Enough," I said, to numbers and ghosts and my own nerves. I stepped into the lane and planted my boots like I'd plant in front of a semi when the driver looks ready to bolt. "Room 203, I called teacher voice, belly breath, diaphragm under the words, "Eyes on me, please." It was ridiculous. It was also the only thing I could imagine a teacher would have said to cut through panic. The desert breathed in. The skittering stopped. A wind-borne hush fell like a blanket, a flash of small fingers at the Taurus's rear glass, then gone. I approached the car's trunk. Inside lay a box of crayons, top torn, colors thin to nubs from use. I took out the blue and pocketed it, don't ask me why, then set the rest on the trunk, as if I were laying out evidence at a scene. "I'll hold these," I said to the air. My voice stayed even. "But we have to talk about mile 41. It doesn't belong where it is, and neither do you." The radio in the Taurus crackled and then steadied on a woman's voice I hadn't heard in decades except on old recordings. I knew the name later from records, but the tone I recognized instantly. Steady, tired, brave. "We're at the wrong marker," she said, not to me but to whatever she believed listened. "We missed the turn." "Stop singing." There was a muffled shuffle, and then a child boy by the timbre asked, "Do we color here, Miss S.?" The woman said, "No, heads down." I swung the spotlight to the shoulder. The mile marker's downrange shifted again like cards in a dealer's hands. 38 edged forward, 39 skated, 40 hesitated and then hopped. A land surveyor's nightmare, but the movement made a circle drawn with numbers, every sign stepping into a loop that centered on the chalk drawings at my boots. A piece of county infrastructure was making a playground dot, then the climax came, quick as a dropped wrench. The dark surged. Time did the brief vertigo trick it does when your ears pop on a mountain. In the flicker of my light bar, the bus appeared, no mass, no engine, the suggestion of a school bus made of heat, haze, and dust. Inside its phantom shell, silhouettes of children sat two to a seat, heads bowed as if bracing. The teacher figure stood in the aisle, one arm out like she could block gravity. On the windows, little handprints you only ever see on classroom glass bloomed and faded. The bus hovered at the edge of asphalt. Front tires turned toward a nowhere road. "Stay with me," I said, not moving, not blinking. "Everybody stay." The radio hissed. The teacher's voice again, firm. "Hold hands." "Room 203, hold hands." The bus tilted like an elevator in the moment before it drops. The wrong 41 scraped closer, its metal face catching my spotlight in a sudden, painful flare. In that flare, the chalk drawing with X's smeared and then straightened, the X's resolving into round dots. The drawn circle of figures tightened as if the stick children had stepped closer. A second later, the bus settled flat. The dark loosened as if a held breath had been released. I didn't move until the phantom pulled away into the shoulder and disappeared like heat behind a curtain. When I could swallow again, I keyed my mic. "Dispatch, 3-5. I need a grid at County 66 between where 39 and 41 should be. Send County Roads 2. This time the tower returned my call clean. Karen's replacement brisk and real. Copy 3-5. Units en route. By the time backup washed the scene in headlights, the numbers on the poles had politely returned to order. The chalk remained, a little scuffed where my boot had tasted it. The Taurus's hood had cooled. The class photo still smiled from the back seat. And the backpack was on my cruiser's hood where I would have sworn I hadn't placed it. Inside, the crayons were intact except for the blue, which sat warm in my pocket as if it had been under a lamp. We ran the Veng. The Taurus had been junked 3 years earlier in Henderson. The dash radio was a model without the band it had used. County Roads confirmed what I knew. No petroglyphs anywhere near. Mile 41, but records turned up something I didn't. In 1992. A tri-state charter number 212 missed a detour sign during a road crew reroute 3 miles east. The bus took the wrong spur call at a ghost ramp that existed for a week and rolled at speed. The teacher's quick counting and a speed drop saved some, not all. 12 children died. The county moved a handful of mile markers during the investigation to match fresh maps instead of fixing the bad geometry right then. Paper over wound. I didn't write the chalk drawings into my report. I didn't write the bus I saw because I liked the pension I earned. What I did write, wrong sign position confirmed. Abandoned vehicle with possible fraud history, personal effects suggesting minors, grid search negative. Then I drove to the post that had worn 41 like a mask and left the box of crayons at its base, minus the one I kept. Payment, maybe. Or acknowledgement. A year later, during the first heat of June when the Mojave turns to a convection oven, I pulled off near mile 41 again. The county had finally poured new asphalt and corrected the line. Fresh signs, bolts bright. But the crayon box was still there under the right-hand post, protected by a little drift of sand like someone had tucked it in. I set the blue in with the rest and walked away. If you ever find yourself on County 66 between Kelvin and nowhere and the wrong mile number flashes past your headlight like a guilty thought, don't chase the giggle. Don't follow the moving signs. The desert keeps its own time, and sometimes it keeps its own roll call. Let the numbers have their game. Keep your hands where the teacher would see them. And if you have anything a child might have loved, sticker, coin, crayon, leave it where the asphalt meets the sand. The highway remembers, even when the county pretends it doesn't. I'm not one of those drivers who needs constant chatter to stay awake. Give me the open interstate, a steady RPM, and a ribbon of static in the cab-white noise like wind in a bottle, and I'll run Utah at night like a metronome. My name's Elijah. I've hauled everything from baled hay to medical isotopes. And I keep a dog-eared notebook of mile markers and storm smells because out here the sky talks if you listen. On the Bonneville fringe, that flat, lunar place where the world turns to salt and horizon static is my church. I cruise through the bands for weather bulletins and ham calls. and the hiss tells me more about the air than the thermometer ever will, that August night. I was heavy 78,000 of cattle feed stacked in a belly trailer laboring east under a heat that made aluminum taste funny. No moon, just a hard sea of stars and the black line of I-80 skirting the flats. The CB was quiet, oversaturated with nothing, and the VHF weather band clucked out a stale advisory, winds intermittent, visibility good. I tilted the dash fan and cracked the side window for a breath of desert that smelled like hot pennies. Then the radio did something I've never seen in 20 years of long hauling. It changed its own mind. The VHF rolled down past the presets like a hand had brushed the dial. The LED stalled on a blank frequency. My manual doesn't list no NOAA, no local repeater, just digital zeros. I reached to switch it off and a woman's voice came through as clean as the day I left home, soft and controlled with the Kansas in it still. "Elijah, shoulders, now." My hand hung in the air. It was my mother's voice tone, clip, the way she sits vowels when she means business. She'd been dead a decade. You don't slam to a stop on a grade with that much weight. "You ease." I tapped brakes in a feathering line, turned my blinker on nobody behind me, and slid onto a skinny service spur that looked more suggestion than road. Salt didn't so much crunch as whisper under my steer tires. I kicked the hazards on and listened for laughter, somebody pranking me on the CB. A voice warbled through a long skip. Nothing. The other radios were all dead. "Hush, cold," rolled through the cab like a door had opened someplace miles wide. August night, dry as a bone, and suddenly there was a refrigerator draft against my forearms. My mirrors caught my own running lights and multiplied them into a chain of red beads, trailing off behind me to the point where distance becomes imagination. Out past the spill of my high beams, the flats spread pale as a cataract. A tremor of motion far out, a low, slow procession wavered in the starlight. Too uniform to be wind, the radio speaker barely crackled when the voice returned. Not my mother this time, but a chorus of other sounds braided together, a pilot reading a checklist. A kindergarten roll call, a farm report, all clipped and faint like somebody flipping past stations without stopping. Underneath it, a thin hum that made the window glass tick in its gasket. The words unbraided and stitched into one sentence. "Stay inside." "They're crossing." My hand found the air brake by habit. I didn't know what "they" meant, but I know a worn tone when I hear it. I could feel the weight of the cattle feed like a sleeping animal behind me. Any hard jolt and it'd wake. The procession out there resolved by degrees head-high shapes marching shoulder to shoulder in a long line, each carrying something long and narrow that skeined the starlight. No lamps, no engine sounds. Just the whisper of thousands of tiny crystals of salt disturbed at once. I don't pretend to courage. I pretend to procedures. I clicked my logbook to inspection, cracked a thermos lid I didn't want, and told the empty cab, "Copy." It steadies the mind to have something to answer. Salt plays tricks with sound. Big noise slides away and little noise creeps close. So the only thing I heard was the soft rasp of the flats as the figures drew level with the spur. The cab thermometer dropped 3 degrees, 5, then 8. My breath fogged a little before it vanished. Out at the edge of my brights, the procession stopped like a single organism. Every head dipped and lifted in the same slow rhythm. The long things they carried, poles, rods, caught starlight, and for a second I thought they were survey crews mapping a line nobody authorized. The radio same blank frequency, same impossible channel threaded a new voice through the static. Old school traffic guy, clip diction from a world of rotary phones. "We are approaching the line." The last word rang inside the cab like a penny flicked against the glass. I eased my hand toward the headlight switch and flashed the highs twice. The way you do for a wrecker crew or troopers clearing a lane? A courtesy. The figures reacted like they'd practiced it. The front rank turned to face me, then looked past me like through me. At something only they could see the past, maybe. When this spur was more than a scab of asphalt with delusions of usefulness? You spend enough nights on interstate edges and you start to understand that roads are palimpsests. They hold what was written before. Wagon tracks under macadam, footpaths under gravel, rut and root and rumor. The flats keep everything because nothing grows big enough to eat the evidence, eh? Smell licked a cab sulfur struck off a match head. The hum in the radio dialed itself up, and I thought of grade school science fairs, tuning forks that shivered my teeth. In the procession, the lead figure lifted his long rod and drove it down into the crust with a single precise jab. The sound it made wasn't a crack. It was a tone, high and clean, that I felt in my molars. A hairline seemed shivered into view, running perpendicular to the spur and incision in the salt that kept breathing once it opened, not wider but deeper. Like a mouth tightening around something thin, I remembered my mother's voice. Shoulders. Now, and for the first time wondered if I'd done exactly the right thing, or exactly the wrong thing by obeying something that couldn't be speaking. I tried the CB again, rolled the squelch, whistled into it out of habit. A cab filled with a dozen ghost loudspeakers, not mine, but as if every truck that had ever parked there piped its voice into the present. Snatches of prayer. A drummer's count. A dispatcher saying, "No one's coming until first light. Just sit tight," and I nearly laughed at the absurdity of the phrase. Inside a night like this, I slid my hand up to the visor and touched the St. Christopher medallion that had hung in every truck I've driven since I inherited it. It was my mother's. She'd tape it above the sink when we were kids, a little joke on saints and dishwater. The metal felt warm, then warmer, as if it had its own pulse. The procession still as pylons began to whisper, though none of their heads moved. It wasn't speech like I know it. It was the impression of agreements. A toll road with no booth. "You want what?" I said aloud, not sure to whom. The seam pulsing in the salt answered with a low breath through teeth. My steering wheel flexed, a delicate bend I wouldn't have believed metal could make if my hands hadn't been on it. They moved again slowly now, as if satisfied the seam would hold. One by one the rods went in, setting an invisible line I couldn't see until my high beams caught a ripple, darker ribbon crossed under the salt crust, like a road paved through water. I understood something then that made my scalp prickle. They weren't laying a new path. They were walking an old one, a ghost road that once cut across the flats and, like all shortcuts, cost more than it saved. The smell of struck matches thickened until I could taste it. My hand dropped from the metal to the dash by gravity more than intention. You don't bargain with night. But if the road is asking, it's because the road can take. The seam brightened like the thinnest edge of dawn no light source, just salt acknowledging an order. My radio, still fixed on nothing, exhaled the most human sound I'd heard all night. Not my mother, not the chorus of traffic ghosts, but a single kid's voice trying very hard to be brave. He couldn't have been older than 10. "We at the line?" he asked, vowels flat with the kind of home that grows alfalfa. Before I could find my throat, the same careful voice that had told room 203 to settle only. This wasn't a teacher now, but someone like a foreman said, "We are." Every window on the truck flexed inward glass tightened by a pressure change that made my ears pop. The procession turned to me. Faces, if I can call them that, were smoothed down like wind-polished stone. No features, only the suggestion of where features had been so often that the salt remembered. The lead figure extended a hand palm up. It wasn't a begging gesture. It was the posture of a uniformed toll-taker or a priest. "Payment," said a dozen radios at once, softer than breath. "I have cash boxes for way stations. I have coins for vending machines." None of that felt right cheap in the way wrong offerings feel like insults. My thumb worried the St. Christopher on the visor. My mother had taped him over a sink, over hospital beds, over the door when she could no longer trust the night not to steal her breath. I pulled the medallion off its elastic, the little ring hot as if heated on the stove, and laid it on the dash where the red of the hazards painted it like a coal. The lead figure inclined his head like a craftsman approving a tool. The humming dropped a register. The seam closed with the softest kiss of sound, no crumble, no crack, just two planes deciding to be one again. The rods came out of the salt clean and productless, and the procession resumed its walk, angling off into the great blank until starlight swallowed the suggestion of their shoulders. The smell of matches dissipated, leaving the faint mineral clean you get after lightning that never actually lands. I reached for the metal without thinking and came up empty. The spot on the dash was cool. The radio gave one last half-second of my mother's laugh, that specific quick exhale she'd make when she'd scored a small victory, like getting the ancient lawnmower to start on the first pull and then went dark. The blank frequency went back to being blank. The cold in the cab lifted. I waited. 5 minutes, 10, a westbound reefer went by, driver never sparing me a glance. When my hands quit shaking, I slid back onto the interstate. The truck felt lighter, though the gauges read the same, and the wheels sang the usual song they sing when the road is honest. 20 miles on, at the little gas and lotto rectangle of Wendover, I parked under the dying light of a canopy and wrote what I could in the notebook that keeps me safe from arguments with myself. I didn't include my mother's name. I didn't include the word toll. I wrote Old Crossing Woke, paid with what I had. It looked silly in the store's fluorescent spill. It felt exactly true. Months later, I hauled a deck to Ogden and a state trooper met me for coffee because he'd heard I collect road talk. Over burnt diner drip, he told me about the old line of forgotten service. Road that once staked a straight. Shot over the flats for a project that never finished. A lot of shortcuts out there, he said, stirring too much sugar into his cup. None of them free. He didn't look like a man who aped ghost stories. He looked like a man who'd hit a thing in the dark that nobody at the garage could find a dent for. I still scan the bands when I cross Bonneville. Static is still my church. Every now and then the VHF stutters like it's thinking about a number that doesn't exist and then chooses not to show me. I keep a replacement St. Christopher on a braided shoelace, a cheap one from a truck stop with a rack of virtues. It's not my mother's, that's the point. The road asked for what had protected us, and I paid. You can call that grief. I call it a toll for a passage I didn't mean to take. If the night ever tells you, in a voice you love and trust, to pull onto the shoulder on the salt, do it. But stay in the cab. Don't honk. Don't photograph. Don't ask bright questions into a quiet that has made answers for people older and steadier than you. Keep a coin, a medal, a button, a token you can afford to lose. The old roads still cross under the new ones, and sometimes they need to be fed so the new ones float safe. That's not romance or superstition. That's maintenance nobody budgets for. Nights at the Desert Spur Inn have a way of sticking to your clothes smoke that's older than the ashtrays. Swamp cooler breath sweet with mildew, the thin copper sting of dust that sneaks in every time the office door sighs. People forget this place exists until they don't. We sit a quarter-mile off the old Devil's Highway, the stretch they rebranded for public relations, as if swapping Route 666 for a cleaner number could sand down the bad corners of a road that's taken more metal than a scrapyard. We don't get walk-ins. We get drifters with cash-folded small and long haulers whose companies still haven't updated their maps. For 5 years, I've run the graveyard and watched the neon vacancy sign sleep like a dead tooth. The wiring to that sign was cut before my first shift. The breaker box has a blank slot where the toggle should be. It's a corpse nailed to the eave. Good for lizards and nostalgia dots, so when it lit up faint at first, then breathing like a lung, I thought the cooler fan had thrown a reflection. I stepped outside. Night out there comes in layers. First the moths tapping their little fists on the glass, then the crickets sawing, then the desert's slow, low hum like a transformer you can't see. The sign shivered to a steady red, the kind that burns into your eyes if you stare wrong. No way, I said to the empty parking lot, and the letters steadied as if I'd said a magic word. Headlights didn't wash the office. No engine, no tires gritting up the drive. The door chime rang anyway. She stood there like she'd been poured out of the dark, a woman early 40s maybe. Wind-chapped cheeks, hair tied back in a thrift store scarf. Dust clean on her shoes like she'd walked on the shoulder, not up the drive. No bag, no phone. She set a Polaroid on the counter with 2 fingers, careful like you'd set a sleeping baby. Room with an east window, she said. Please. I slid the photo closer. A little boy squinted at me from a back-seat car seat with the old square buckles popsicle smear on his chin, a stuffed Roadrunner clutched under one arm. The date slanted in black marker across the white border, July 13th, 86. The corner was thumb-rounded smooth. The woman's hands trembled, then stilled. "He'll be here soon," she added. "I need to see the road." I felt for the register ticket, our printer that screeches like a trapped insect. The paper unscrolled blank. That happens when the roll's in wrong. I glanced at the monitor bank where our cameras loop 8 gray rectangles lot. Office, breezeway, roommate's exterior. The feed for 8 was black. Had been black since before my time. The cable's cut somewhere in the soffit. Still, I checked it the way you check a locked door you know is locked. "East window," I repeated. "That's 8. I slid her the key fob with the brass tag. "Cash or card?" She blinked like I'd asked a riddle, then touched the Polaroid. "He'll be here soon," she said again, following the words to the door like a tether. I stepped out with her. Heat rippled off the lot, though midnight had cooled the concrete by a degree or two. Out at the edge of highway, where the desert starts making its old sounds, the vacancy sign ticked in its frame. Bugs bent themselves to incandescent suicides. I pointed at the eaves and tried on a joke. "That light's been dead a long time," I said. "Woke up for you." She didn't look up. She looked east down the black ribbon. "It wakes when he's close," she murmured. "It wakes so he can see where to turn." Inside, the coffee maker had the metallic tang it gets when the county's water goes rust-heavy, like licking a battery. I poured 2 anyway. She stirred sugar until the spoon stood upright, then took it out without tasting and set the cup on the sill of the office window like an offering. When I tried to swipe her card through a machine that's older than some of our guests, the screen blinked error, line even, though it had taken a receipt 20 minutes earlier. I wrote room 8 on a blank line, the way we do for truckers who promise to settle in the morning, and slid her the carbon copy. The paper came away clean. No imprint. She walked the breezeway and touched each door as if they were cheeks. At 8, she paused, pressed the brass tag to the jamb instead of the lock, and the knob turned for her like a trained dog. On the monitor bank, the square for 8 stayed a hole punched in the night. Around 2:13, tires whispered on asphalt out where the highway wears its own whisper track. My moths convulsed as if a bass note I couldn't hear had trembled the glass. The vacancy sputtered to nitrogen monoxide and back again like a mouth arguing with itself. I stepped to the office window, and the night held its breath. That was the moment I understood the sign wasn't lit for people who needed a room. It was a beacon for someone who'd never made it to one. I've worked enough third shifts to know that sometimes the world puts on a different face after 2 in the morning. Street cats look like messengers. Fog gets ambitious. Old fluorescent bulbs sound like insects rehearsing for the end of days. But the way the air changed then was not a trick. It thinned. Every breath felt longer, with a coolness that didn't belong to July. If you've stood inside a gym when the power dies and the hum stops being the water you didn't know you swam in, you know the feeling. Space reintroduces itself. The woman came back to the office with the kind of stillness that looks like shock until you hear the gears. She stood beside me at the window without asking. Out on the highway, a smudge of headlight pulled itself into the world and then didn't, not the way it should have. Normal light throws a cone that catches dust and turns it into snow. This glow laid itself across the lane like a sheet flat low, too wide, as if someone were dragging a flashlight under the asphalt and you were seeing the seep. "Late," she said. Her voice cracked and came back professional in the next syllable, the way school teachers fix their own faces by reflex. "He's never this late when the sign is on." "You're waiting for your boy?" I asked and regretted it. I sounded like a gas station clerk trying to sell batteries to a woman whose house was on fire. She nodded without taking her eyes off the road. "He's 5.5, she said. "He likes the cherry popsicles best, but he says he likes grape because that's what his cousin likes." On the desk, the Polaroid leaned against the bell like a saint card. Popsicle smear, Roadrunner plush, a bright horizon line in the back glass that might have been a reflection of the sun. I picked it up to buy my hands something to do, and the ink was still the faintest bit damp. You can learn a lot behind a counter. I know the difference between cribbed IDs and a bad laminate, between cheap perfumes and expensive regrets, between old photos and ones snapped 10 minutes ago with a filter to scratch them. This picture was old. The date was older. But the chemistry on my fingertips lifted just enough to convince me something in it hadn't settled. The office clock thunked over a minute like a bad knee. Out in the lot, the vacancy jittered. Vacang no vacancy. You could convince yourself the wind had gotten inside the housing. The swamp cooler coughed a wet lungful and fell quiet. The motel's long, low body creaked as if it had turned in sleep and discovered a bone. "Coffee?" I offered. Another candle in a Catholic church. The woman didn't answer. Her eyes tracked something that I couldn't see yet. At the far edge of the property where the asphalt goes back to scrub and the scrub goes back to the patient stones, sound arrived ahead of its maker, a gentle plastic squeak. Rhythmic, the kind seat belts used to make when they rubbed the cheap vinyl buckles, followed by a faint coo that raised every hair on my arms. An infant not entirely content. Protesting the tyranny of straps, I found myself thinking about the old news clippings laminated under the front desk glass. Tornadoes that had chewed distant towns to ribs. A preacher who had spent a month on the roof with a sign that said, "Be not afraid," until the county came by with paperwork. A drunk who'd driven through our sign in '86, right into a family's car halfway down the drive. We keep those clippings because owners like a story that seems to be about survival. Somewhere in the collage there's a black and white of the first "no vacancy" sign, the original one. Men in hats. Smiles too wide. The bulb pattern looks like a halo over their heads, no Christ under it. Just a promise of bodies in beds. The woman set her palm to the window. She didn't fog it. The cool on the glass was on the wrong side outside. "Don't open the door," she said. And I didn't. We stood like that with our separate breaths and the moths punching their small failures against the pane. The glow on the highway rippled like heat in reverse, the way air shivers above a cold river. The motel's cheap art leaned in its frames, desert scenes with coyotes wearing sly grins. An artist's signature I'd misread as mercy for years until I noticed the Y was a V dot in the security bank. Camera 3, the one face down the breezeway toward 8, should have shown a length of stucco, 2 dead potted yucca, the faded door. Instead, snow hissed. Not static. Snow tiny flecks drifting downward. I tapped the casing. The flecks stuck to the edge of the tube and melted into dark stains like they were wet on the inside of the monitor. The feed for the office door flared white and then corrected. Through the real window, the road's glow had pulled up to the turnoff and stopped in a way that suggested parking, except it hadn't arrived, so it couldn't stop. The sound of the seatbelt squeak ceased. The infant's cooing became wordless, attention pulled elsewhere. "What is it?" I whispered, hating the softness in my mouth. I've thrown knife-waving fights out of 4. I've slept a month on the lobby couch during a bedbug scare when no one else would work. I should not whisper in my own office. The woman's lips moved like she was tasting names someone else had said. "It's not a car," she answered. "It wears car the way a coyote wears a dog's trust. Do you see?" And then I did not with my eyes exactly, but the way a picture resolves when you stop trying to make it be what you expect. Something long and low held the lane in a cradle. Its edges were the lie of chrome. Its windshield was the idea of glass with desert inside it, a ripple of dry light. A stretch of brush where reflections should be? In that rectangle hung a single back seat that wasn't attached to anything, floating like an aquarium ornament. The seat was empty. The faintest imprint of small thighs splayed outward still darkened the vinyl. The Roadrunner plush sat in the corner, turned so only the embroidery of the eye watched us. Room 8's doorknob rolled in its collar like a horse's eye. The brass tag on the key lay on the mat like it had been placed there for me to see. The vacancy sign brightened until the red bled into black. "He always finds me when it's lit," the woman said, voice so steady it made the rest of me feel like I was shaking. "If I stand in the window—" "Whatever that is," I said, "it shouldn't be here." It felt foolish, like telling lightning not to practice scales on a ridge. She nodded. It shouldn't, she agreed. But it came here last time, and I was late. Out on the road, the knock car turned its attention toward us like a dog deciding whether to rise. The wind found its throat again and cleared it. We braced for a visitor. It crossed the lot without touching it. Tires should sing on that old aggregate weeds that grow through it make a particular song when rubber mutes them. Instead, there was only the faint elastic whisper of seatbelt fabric slipping, then catching, then slipping again. The knock car settled in front of room 8 and let the motel's bad light pull a shape over it like a sheet thrown over furniture. The outline said sedan. The inside said desert. What should have been a windshield tunneled into a heat shimmer, and inside that shimmer floated the single back seat like a votive. The woman opened the office door before I could stop her and stepped out into the cooler air with a calm that looked borrowed. "Ma'am," I called, and even to me it sounded like a word from a script. She didn't turn. "Stay," she said, not to me. "To the dark." I followed because there's a gravitational law about people who step toward things that shouldn't be possible. The moths fell away in drifts around the doorframe, small corpses soft as ash. The vacancy sign brightened to the color of a fresh wound and began to hum, a pitch so low it set the brass key tags to a tiny sympathetic clatter on the pegboard. The knock car's door didn't open so much as reconsider the concept of closed. Space softened at the right place and air slung cold from a cavity I couldn't see, the way an icebox sighs when you crack it. The back seat within the desert rectangle showed a Polaroid lying where a child's hip should have been. Face up, the same boy, the same roadrunner, the same date like a brand. The woman reached into the wrong distance with both arms, careful like nurses are careful, and came away holding nothing. You have never seen anyone cradle emptiness with such skill. The air made room for the shape she believed in. For a second I saw the resistant scope fabric wrinkling where it met weight, her wrists taking on the angle you take when you catch a half-sleeping child too heavy for one arm. Tears jolted out of her like she'd been punched. "You took the long way," she whispered. "But you found the sign." The infant's coo came from nowhere and everywhere at once and then stopped as if soothed. The knock car reacted. Not like a machine, like a sigh. Its inside desert brightened a heat shade toward noon and then darkened to an evening that didn't match ours. In the office window, I saw us reflected inside its wrong glass, her with her burden and me with both hands empty in a posture that felt obscene. A man praying with no God to address. "Miss," I said, because adults sometimes hang their names in the air the way children hang onto your jacket. She looked at me then, eyes blown wide with the light of something nobody had built. "They missed the turn," she said, and for a moment the classroom in her voice carried 12 kids. A driver, a packed cooler of warm juice boxes, a rope of rules and jokes that had kept them all more or less together. We missed it, once. The vacancy hiccuped. NO burned through it, one red segment at a time, and then everything popped. Not burst, not fizzled popped, as if a vacuum lost purchase on the world. The sign went dark. The knock car's outline folded back into night. The humming stopped, so thoroughly my ears invented its ghost. The woman held her arms a heartbeat longer, as if feeling a last residual weight, and then pressed that nothing gently to her chest and kissed the air above it. When she let go the way you do when the child has decided, for you fingers softened. Elbows released, heart refusing. By sunrise, room 8 was empty. The key lay on the counter with the Polaroid, but it wasn't quite the same. The Roadrunner's stitched eye had turned toward a slightly different horizon. The popsicle smear had drifted up toward the nose. You can tell yourself photos don't do that. You can also watch it and know they sometimes do. In the bottom corner, the date was still July 13th, 86. In the old clipped clippings under the glass, that was the "Summer or Drunk" Modar sign and the sedan in the same length of night. The county repaved, rebranded, resolved. The highway got a new name with a coat of sanctimony thick enough to make investors smile. The side roads kept the old bones. I filed the log like it was any shift. Sign anomaly, room comped, guest departed before dawn. I did not write, vehicle constructed of suggestion. I did not write. Woman collected a shape only she could feel. When the day clerk came in, I took the Polaroid off the counter and set it beneath the glass with the mayor's groundbreaking and the headline about the preacher. We don't have saints, but we do have proof. 2 weeks later, at exactly the hour the cooler coughs its midnight breath, the phone we don't have plugged in rang. You learn the language of dead things in a motel. The way the TV static changes when the upstairs couple quits fighting. The way old neon makes your teeth hurt. The office handset lifted it itself a quarter-inch in the cradle and settled. The line light glowed. I don't take pride in picking up calls that shouldn't exist, but I did that night. The voice was the sound a hallway makes when a class returns from recess shoes. Whispers, a teacher looking for her attendance sheet. Roommate? It asked, and the dial tone bled back in, high and lonely. I keep a cup of crayons under the counter now. Like the highway patrolman says he does with mile markers blue missing more often than it should be? Sometimes moths collect in the lamp above the sign and don't die until the letter's warm. Sometimes the vacancy shivers a red the breaker box can't account for. When that happens, I prop the office door and set the Polaroid by the bell and don't run the cards. If a woman in a scarf steps out of the dark and asks for an east-facing window, I don't make jokes about electricity. I give her 8 and tell her the view is good. If you see our sign burning when there's no reason it should, I advise you keep the wheel straight on by. I will be here counting keys that clink like muted prayers. There are plenty of rooms when you need one. But sometimes the light is not for people who are tired. It's for people who are lost and insist on arriving anyway. And if you do turn in, if you can't help it, open no doors you did not close. Do not try to carry what isn't yours. The vacancy that calls on that road is not about beds. It is about making room. When people vanish in the Oregon mountains, they don't always go far. Sometimes the distance is a tight circle hidden inside bad rock and worse decisions. And our job in search and rescue is to walk that circle until a human shape interrupts it. I've been volunteering 10 seasons post-hike blisters, helmet hair, and a garage that smells like rope and sunblock. We run a lot of false starts. Phone batteries die. Folks take goat trails that are really waterfalls in disguise. But the thing that keeps you humble are the roads, old maintenance switchbacks, carved by a mining company that dynamited its way into the ridge and then left the mountain to chew the cuts back down. Paper maps don't show those turns. Apps guess and get it wrong. The locals call one of those spurs the loop, like it's a joke. It isn't. The evening our call came in, monsoon humidity had the Ocotillo bearding little clumps of green, and heat had pressed itself into the rocks so deep they exhaled warmth like sleeping animals. Dispatch said, single camper, solo van lifer, 30s, last ping on a service road behind the Oregon Needles. His message to a friend, something's repeating the road under my tires. The friend thought it was a metaphor. I didn't. We staged at the washed-out cattle guard and hiked in. 3 in our team, me, Alvarez, and a new medic named June, whose pack was too neat and who would, by midnight, learn why we tape our headlamp buttons. The spur is technically closed signs every quarter mile, but closure in the desert is a suggestion. People read no vehicles as vehicles if you are careful. The road rolled up the slope in tight S's, a rumor of guardrail posts that had given up and gone to rust. Crickets scratched. Night frogs started their dumb metronome from a wash that looked dry enough to powder. We found the van at the 4th turn. No skid, no impact, just parked square in the lane as if the driver had decided this was a fine place to sleep. Doors yawning open. Headlamps still warm, but no dome-like glow. Alvarez marked the tires. What should have been 4 prints in soft caliche were many same treads stamped over themselves, until the dust had compacted to a kind of ceramic sheen. You see that pattern where kids spin in place or where a dog can't decide whether to lie down. Here it said, stayed again, stayed too long, halloo. I called into the juniper. The road pitched itself back my voice a half-second late as if rehearsing. June walked a slow circle, reading boot prints. Backtrack, she said, pointing uphill. He walked up. We followed his steps to the previous switchback and then the one before that, same heel scuff, same tiny nick in the left tread where the sole had kissed a thorn. The prints were not simply similar. They were identical. The same pebbles displaced in the same fan, the same crescent of grit rubbed by the same boot toe. Copy-paste. My radio hissed. Stay together, I said, speaking the rule because saying it makes it more true. The radio echoed me a beat later. Together, ether. Not repeater lag. A bounce. Sound does that between rock faces, I told myself. Except the organ walls weren't close enough for a bounce that clean dot as twilight dyed the slopes bruise purple. We reached a downed warning placard in the sage. White letters baked into aluminum decades ago. Do not re-enter turn under it. A newer arrow had been bolted on brand new hardware glinting. The kind the county uses when someone with a budget shows up pointing back uphill. Who bolted that? June asked. Alvarez ran his fingertip over the clean metal. Not BL, he said. They tag everything. We looked up the road. The next bend was the same as the last. A shoulder of gravel, a notch in the ridge, a splotch of lichened granite like a birthmark. Pattern, then repeat. The desert does pattern. It doesn't usually do copy. We found his voice before we found him. The tired rasp people make after the body's done with adrenaline and the mind hasn't noticed. Back, he was saying softly. Back, back, back. He stood in the middle of the next switchback, arms held out as if balancing on a beam. 30-something, beard brittle with dust, pupils too large. He flinched when I raised my hands in the universal, we're not here to hurt you. Don't put me further in, he said. I've heard people say, don't move me, when they think they've broken a spine. I've never heard someone talk about distance like it's a trapdoor. We did the basic checks. Heat stroke? Mild. Lacerations? None? Dehydration? Some psychology? Shot, I asked his name. He gave me a first plus a laugh like it didn't matter. He pointed uphill at a notch in the ridge. That, he said. And that. And that. The notch above us was the same notch below. The saguaro with a black cavity in its side had a twin at the next turn. The yucca with a bent stalk stood in for itself over and over. The road had not only doubled. The mountain had stamped a shape and pressed it down the slope like a cookie-cutter dot. We leashed him between us with a short handline, because he swayed as if a current pushed through him. June checked her altimeter. 5400, she read. We took 20 steps down. 5401, she said. Now 5399. The number beat like a heart. Sunset is when the mountain starts making its real weather. A stray breeze found us and tasted like hot breaks, a bitter metallic smell that carries memory. When it comes from thin air, no vehicle, no descent, it means something else is grinding. Somewhere above us, a stone knocked itself loose and ticked down 1,000 years. I looked at the van, at the copy-paste of boot prints, at the placard with its new arrow telling us to re-enter the turn we had just left. We're leaving the road, I said. Alvarez didn't argue. The road wanted us to stay. That was reason enough. You don't abandon a road lightly at night. Roads are promises, grade, direction, human intention laid over geology. But any rescuer will tell you there are nights the road is the hazard. We cut our headlamps to low, snapped glow sticks in our helmets to keep track of the bob of one another's heads, and stepped into the scrub below the inside shoulder crunch of crushed cholla, hiss of sand across boot leather. The air felt wrong in a way that doesn't make a sound, but still registers like a room you know is occupied. Even when you can't see the person. We chose a bearing aligned with the ridge, not with the switchback the mountain's line. Not the roads, and slid on our butts 15 feet, down a slope littered with scree and shards of plate-like rock that wanted to flip under our weight. We moved slow. The loop didn't like that. Something in the quiet elevated, a pressure that punished indecision. Straight, I said, not because the terrain wanted it, but because language sometimes bullies physics into cooperating. Our subject, the van lifer, wobbled between us, mumbling numbers like he'd been counting his own. Footsteps until counting had become an incantation. He couldn't stop speaking. Behind us. The left-in-place flares were just memory and smell. The road was a darker dark above, a band where nothing reflected. We passed a scatter of bones, jackrabbit, sun-whitened, and a beer can that looked new, though there was no way it should have made it down this cut without denting. The wind fell still. Crickets went to zeros. That's a worse sound in the desert, the subtraction of small lives. Water, June offered. He refused without looking. If I drink here, I'll owe it, he said. And whatever makes a rescuer want to laugh at superstition stayed quiet in me, because sometimes the mountain is a ledger, and sometimes you haven't read the terms. We crested a minor lip and looked down. Into no metaphor, the same switchback, same shoulder-wide apron of gravel, same painted line ghosted into the hardpan, faint but present even though paint shouldn't have lasted this long. Same post hole where a guardrail should be, with the same oval of clumped dirt around its mouth like a bruise. I checked our compass. It said we'd left the road and cut across. The earth said we had returned to it. June looked like she wanted to pitch the device over the edge and use the stars. Ridge signal says we're on the west face, Alvarez murmured, checking his map light. Our phones insisted on east. We were oriented correctly and entirely wrong at once. The ridgeline offered us the same silhouette notch it had last turn and the turn before that. My radio burped up our own voices, delayed a lifetime of heartbeats. Stay together, together, together. The last together had someone else's mouth around it. A schoolteacher's tone, patient, the kind that can pin 30 kids to the carpet. Who moved the signs? June asked to no one. The downed placard reappeared at the inside corner. Do not re-enter, turn its arrow, newly bolted, pointing back into the curve we had just left, as if the strongest advice the mountain could give was to keep circling until it ate us. The subject balked at the corner, heels plowing dust. Can't do the turn, he said. Every time I take it, I end up further in, like chewing. He made his hands into teeth. We clipped him short on the line and cut diagonally again. This time the smell came first, onions crushed underfoot. Desert onions, paper skins, surprising this high. The onion scent rode a weird companion. The hot break bitterness had gone, replaced by the metallic tang of a dry thunderstorm that had not yet formed. Static tickled the hairs on my wrist. Somewhere the loop drew charged out. We came on a bed of rocks arranged too neatly to have fallen this way. Flat stones laid edge to edge like someone started paving with what they had and lost interest. In their gaps grew a moss that shouldn't have had water in July but did. My boot print filled with a sheen that caught starlight. You learn to catalog wrongness with your nose. First ozone where there's no power line. Rain inside a cave mouth, cold from ground that should be warm. Here it was onions and wet where there shouldn't be either. Angle steeper, I said. We crabbed sideways, trusting the compass over the repeating scenery. The loop hated that. It answered with topography. A shallow gully that hadn't been on the last traverse opened at our feet. We roped our subject across in 3 moves, my hip bones taking the tug of his panic through the harness. June muttering inventory to herself, anchors, Prusix, the prayer of gear lists. We came up panting into a short sage flat studded with ocotillo that had bent their spines the same way as the ones 2 turns above. The sameness was a cousin to hypnosis. Your brain wants to accept it to save energy. I won't. I kept talking to break the spell. When did you notice it? I asked the subject. He tried on a grin and failed. The 3rd time I passed my own coffee spill, he said. I stopped to move a rock. A mile later, same rock, same spill. I backed up to break the loop. That's when the road put me forward. He looked at me like a kid looks at a coach when he's done everything right and still lost. If I close my eyes, he said, I can feel the turn happening under me even when I'm not moving. We cut the switchback again. This time the mountain offered us a bribe, distant town glow, a smear of sodium lamps that looked like civilization. It sat at the exact angle that would make a person think, just one more turn and we're done. I followed that false city a dozen times in a dozen ranges. It always lives a turn away. Ignore it, I said. Eyes on the compass and the stars. June whistled low between her teeth. I hate when the mountain comes with a personality, she muttered. I prefer geology. By full dark, the ridge breeze found a way to speak, a low runnel through the Ocotillo like someone playing a saw. The altimeter jittered numbers we couldn't make parse. We cut the road a fourth time and stepped not onto gravel but into a pocket of cold so defined it had an edge. My breath smoked. Our subject sucked wind like he'd fallen into snowmelt. In the circle of that cold lay something I didn't want to see, boot prints that were ours, printed ahead of us, length for length, a half-inch deeper as if time had settled on them. The loop wasn't just repeating the turns, it was repeating us. Okay, I said, very calm so I wouldn't insult the mountain. We do this the ugly way. We got low. We spread our weight. We took a bearing that disrespected every convenience of the terrain and promised blood. When the road wants a say, you give the mountain your knees instead? Our ugly line knifed across the slope through shin-stabbing sodal and catclaw that drew bright beads every place it touched. I bled into my sock and didn't say so. Sometimes the mountain asks for a small proof you are paying attention. We crawled under a fallen saguaro whose arms had fossilized into lattice, then bellied over a lip that scolded our ribs. The road above and below tried to reassert itself with every head turned. There's the same notch. There's the same yucca crown, there's the same guardrail hole, but the compass needle held stubborn. It trembled near a seam of magnetite and then corrected, like a dog shaking off a bad thought. Halfway across the longest cut, the mountain tested our choice. The wind quit. The insects withdrew their little saws. The quiet wasn't absence so much as presence, the loop paying attention. Our subject froze and would have tumbled if the line hadn't sung tight. It's starting the turn, he whispered, eyes on nothing. Under us, I did the thing a field trainer had taught me years ago, put my palm flat on the soil. It thrummed, very faint, a heartbeat under a blanket. Not quake, not traffic pattern. The mountain was running a program. If we let it would set us back on the road's geometry the way a spring-loaded gate snaps shut behind you. Belay, I said, and Alvarez slung a loop over a rock tooth and turned himself into an anchor. June took our subject's weight. I did the rude thing. I stood and ran the last 10 yards through chaparral so the loop couldn't adjust for my pace. I hate running in harness. Everything slaps, but the land didn't have time to move its pieces. I came up and over onto a shelf I hadn't seen from below, a raw cut, not road, not game, trail fresh stone, bright as bone. I dropped and dug my gloves into it. Here, I called. Alvarez moved rope. June shoved our subject forward with the kind of compassion that doesn't ask before it rescues. He collapsed beside me, sobbing once like a man getting feeling back in a frozen hand. We hauled Alvarez last. The three of us lay in a row and listened. The road hummed below, disappointed. The turn happened without us, and exhale we weren't inside. The shelf where we sprawled did not belong to the repeating geometry. It belonged to the mountain's older decision about how to stack itself. The frog calls we'd heard earlier fell away like a radio someone had turned off in a house we were leaving. Another smell took the place of Hot Break's wild onion crushed under our elbows from where we'd crawled. Sweat cooled. The night reset its crickets. Out is that way, I said, pointing along the shelf. Away from the siren of the false town glow, away from the duplicating notches. We skirted the face for 50 yards and dropped into a shallow drainage lined with rounded stones that spoke of water even though no water showed. My altimeter ticked a clean descent that matched the feeling in my knees. The road came into view below us not as a copy but as itself, imperfect, sloughed in places, with a pothole shaped like a boot sole because of how the county repairs with the molds they've got. The sameness had broken. The loop, for now, had lost us. We hit macadam and did not celebrate. We walked downhill in the lane but kept to the crown, not trusting the shoulders. The subject muttered, back, back, until the words ran out of battery. Half a mile on, we reached our own flares from hours earlier burned out, wires curled like hair, and a fourth we hadn't lit, its cap twisted off and set aside by a careful hand. On the inside corner lay the do not re-enter term placard again. But this time the arrow was gone, bolt holes bright and empty. Someone or something had moved the instruction that had been trying to trap us and then lost interest when we stopped obeying Dot at the van. The air felt ordinary. Mice under the engine bay. Dust in the carpet, a blanket still holding the day's heat. Keys lay on the driver's seat where no prudent person leaves them. June stashed them in our subject's pocket and said, "You can ride down with us." He shook his head like a dog shaking water. "Walk," he said. "I need to walk something straight." We didn't argue. We kept the handline on him and made the long, easy S's we should have made hours before. The honest switchbacks that take you down a mountain without pretending they're shortcuts. At the cattle guard. Our radios found the world again. We called it in. Subject, located, ambulatory, no transport needed. Unusual terrain confusion, recommend temporary closure. I wrote the summary later the way we write all impossible things, with nouns that don't quarrel. Terrain anomaly. Repeating features. Subject disoriented. Assisted egress by off-road traverse. No injuries. I did not write, "The road tried to keep us." That kind of sentence gets you an email about stress leave. Daylight made the organ. Needles look like architecture again, cathedrals of stone pinned to blue. Our subject drank water in small sips and stared at nothing and then at his van as if it might lunge. "It's not just the turns," he said finally, voice papery. "The ground got copped. The same rocks. The same breeze?" I kept thinking if I corrected one thing the rest would follow, but it all kept agreeing with itself. He looked at me. "How'd you break it?" "Straight line the loop didn't plan for," I said. "Payment in blood and gear rash." It was a joke. It wasn't. He nodded like a churchgoer. A month later, the county set new barriers and poured a row of fresh signs on the spur. Area closed, unstable road. The placards stayed for 2 weeks, then started showing up rotated, pointing back where a driver had just come from. We don't patrol signs. We do sometimes straighten them when we pass. I've stopped touching the ones on that spur. They're not for us. If you hit those organ switchbacks after dark and your GPS jitters or your altimeter reads like a heartbeat, don't trust the turns to deliver you. Trust angles. Trust stars. Trust the ugly line that scrapes your shins. The mountain doesn't mind being circled when it's your idea. It minds when the road makes a game of you. And if a fallen placard tells you not to re-enter the turn you just left, read it as the only honest sentence the loop can bear to say out loud. I walk lines for a living. Folks think pipelines are dragons you can spot from a mile off. But most of what I track is buried metal and paperwork ghost cathodic protection readings. Coding holidays, pig-run anomalies that turn out to be mud wasps sitting on a sensor. West Texas makes a particular kind of silence around steel. You learn to hear voltage the way ranchers hear weather. By smell alone, I can tell you if you're standing over gasoline, crude, or a story the company would rather we didn't put in email. The Agua Negra spur is where the road gave up first. A flood ate the bridge, county ran out of money, and the asphalt just stops like a sentence that's lost its verb. Our pipe crosses the arroyo 30 yards downstream, 40-8 inches of welded carbon steel with a wrap that was expensive when I was a rookie and is magic now that I'm the one signing off on patches. My routine is simple. Park on the dead road, hike down, check spans and anchors, log readings. If the pipe hums wrong, I hear it in the solace of my boots. That afternoon, heat stacked itself in wavering pains over mesquite and creosote. Vultures spun their slow clockwork. I parked with the nose of my truck peeking into nothing and killed the engine. In the sudden quiet the desert made, I popped the case on my old Geiger, the one we keep for weld density checks when a contractor swears his gamma picks just didn't upload. The battery was out. The meter chattered anyway. At first I thought I'd kicked the case. Then the clicks began to arrange themselves. Not the random popcorn of stray particles. Cadence. My radio was off. My phone in airplane mode because the company hates interference when you write official numbers. I set the meter on the hood and watched the needle tremble like a heartbeat learning to be a metronome. Must be the culvert, I told myself. The old roadbed is undercut by concrete tubes the county poured sometime in the 60s. So flash floods could race under without taking the asphalt with them. The tubes are mostly silt now, home to pack rats and a ribbon of cold that survives. July. A wind rose off the arroyo carrying the smell of damp clay and something else, like long-dead flowers crushed in a church book. I slung the satchel with the half-inch wrench and a saddlebag of test. Leads and walked to the lip. The world stepped down 10 degrees. My breath did a little fog trick it had no right to do in May. Sand fleas jumped in the shade. The pipe lay exposed, long and perfect like a spine caught mid-breath. Farther down the bank, a shape embedded in the clay-winked metal, glass, a little cloth flag that had fossilized into stone. I put my hand to it and felt paper crumble under my fingers, the way onion skin does when you found a box of someone else's letters. On the brass plate stamped into the cylinder were numbers and a word, launch, 1959, a radio sonde. Weather balloon guts and a promise the sky would tell us its plans. Behind me, the Geiger, sitting up on the truck hood in the heat, chattered faster. The sound thinned like a child tapping the underside of a table high, steady, purposeful. Morse, if your ear is old enough to remember when teenagers learned it to pass the time in basements. I'm not a ham, but every pipeline crew has a guy who is. I know SOS when it spells itself in my teeth. This wasn't SOS, short taps, grouped and patient. STOYDRY. I stood in the mouth of the culvert and let my eyes adjust. Somebody had strung a line of small mirrors along the top of the tube, spaced like vertebrae. Dust fogged them, but each held a bend of my own face, jaw a little longer, nose a shade off. I just hungry enough to be someone you'd step away from in a gas station line. When my headlamp picked up the curve of the steel, it threw back a pale glimmer like stars dragged under water. The message tapped on, crisper now that I'd committed the sin of noticing. Stay dry, stay dry. Stay the air in the culvert turned the kind of cold you meet when you open a meat. Locker door and the smell in there found something metallic in my mouth. Above, the wind didn't sound like wind anymore. It sounded like singing under asphalt high and fluted, like a beer bottle you blow across when you've got the time and the boredom to make noise. The pipe hummed a companion note. I laid my palm to it and felt not the steady 60 cycle you get from stray current, but a pulse and reply. Call and answer. I've written equipment anomaly more times than I've admitted to hearing a thing that wasn't supposed to talk. But as I kicked silt off the anchor bolts and felt grit scratch the tender webbing of my fingers, I knew the Agua Negra spur was speaking in a language of thin steel and old storms. I should have gone back to the truck, called it in, and waited for the company man. Instead, I did what people do when they think rules are for other messes. I went deeper. The culvert throat narrowed enough to make a grown man consider his choices. I crabbed sideways with my shoulder against cool concrete and the satchel snagging on rebar stubs. The mirrors ticked in a tiny wind, reflecting thin ribbons of my headlamp. Each glass square flickered a version of me marching into the dark. And here's the part I kept out of the report. They didn't stay in sync. One me bit his lip before I did. Another turned to glance behind a heartbeat early like he'd heard a shoe scuff I hadn't. In the corner of one, the word debt skimmed across the silvering like oil on water at the far end of the tube. Centuries of arroyo had laid down a slope of silt, soft as flour. I took one step and sank to mid-calf. Clay pulled at my boot with the insistence of a tired hand. My lamp threw the geometry of the pipe against the earthen bank, a long, pale curve and a black seam where coating had lifted. I reached to brush it with my glove and the line throbbed like a plucked string. The hum rose, found a harmonic, and grew teeth. The Geiger still on the truck hooed up above answered like a trained dog. I heard its higher register through the culvert concrete as, if the instrument were suddenly in my pocket, then the sky fell, no lightning. No warning. Just a roar of brown. Monsoon out of blue is a West Texas parlor trick the sky pulls to remind you who's host. In less than a minute the arroyo became a throat being cleared. The temperature crashed 10 more degrees and all the air slammed left like a door in a bar fight. I wedged myself into the culvert's crook and bear-hugged the pipe. Debris flattened against me, sticks, a tire sidewall, a dead thing so old the bones came apart like beads. My knuckles rang against steel as the water punched. The mirrors along the roof didn't shatter. They tilted. The images inside multiplied, a whole battalion of me in high waist crouched around a shiny backbone. In half of them, my mouth moved. In those, my lips spelled pay it down. The current eased from slaughter to shove. I got a breath and then another. Silt boiled around my thighs. The Geiger's Morse dropped in tempo, from urgent to patient, like a teacher waiting for a class to settle. Somewhere between my teeth and my eardrums, the note inside the pipe resolved for a second into a woman's voice speaking Spanish as if through a wall. I can follow a work order in Spanish, cuss at a stubborn rig in Spanish, flirt badly with a taqueria line in Spanish. What I heard was older, the music of vowels from a woman who had learned to command men with a soft voice and hard eyes. The word that stood alone, the one even a gringo inspector couldn't miss, was duda. I fished the test lead out with a hand that had gone cold enough to fumble and clipped onto the anchor lug to get a reading I could show a supervisor. The needle crept into a sane range, then walked back as if someone stroked it. We designed cathodic protection to push electrons the right way, so our expensive tube doesn't give itself back to the dirt. But the numbers on my reader did something I've never seen. They matched a rhythm. 4 beats high, 4 low. Breathe in, breathe out. The road above me dead as a budget cut was moving sound like a throat. I backed out of the culvert on elbows and heels, my satchel bumping my ribs with a solid reassurance, and came up the bank into full light like a man in a bad movie who thinks he has outrun the monster. The dead road had a new gloss to it, dark, damp, as if it had licked itself. The Geiger lay on the hood where I'd left it, needle resting in a lazy swing. I shut it off, and it made no difference. The tapping continued in the dashboard plastic and the windshield. Glass. S-T-Y-D-R, the word D-R-Y never completed because the road burped water. A thin mouthful from a crack and the hot air boiled it into ghost. I walked the abutment where the bridge had been. Old rebar teeth stuck out like busted piano wire. Wedged among the rocks lay a truck axle polished by years of water teeth. Farther down, a spool of rusted fencing wrapped itself around a snag and hummed a sympathetic note when the wind lifted. My boots left prints that filled not with water but with something darker, the way oil stains bleed up and Sun. Company men have a phrase. For this kind of day, do not escalate. It means don't write a thing that will require an engineer to drive 4 hours in AVP to get curious. It means budget is a creature that hunts anything that smells like attention. But silence is a ledger too. I pulled a bandana and tied it at my neck the way my grandfather had when he worked a job where bricks fell out of the sky and somebody still had to whistle lunchtime. Then I did a thing that would not survive in any version of the report. I spoke to the road. You've got a claim, I said, out loud, to asphalt, to pipe, to culvert and culvert ghosts. Name it. The hum in the pipe lowered half a note like a big throat clearing. The mirrors in the culvert steadied to a single me. The Geiger ticked just once, sharply like a metronome murder, and in the huge quiet that followed, a memory I didn't own unrolled itself in my head, a crew in 1959 standing where I stood. 1 foot in debt, 1 in dinner hour, told by a foreman there'd be pay when the check's clear. Storm wedged the argument. 3 men took the truck anyway. The road ate the bridge ate the truck, and the pipe blade later learned the song those men were singing when the arroyo shut their mouths. I don't pretend divination. I pretend to procedures. But the line had written a story down its length, and for once the reader was me. Water recedes the way a lie does, slow at first, then all at once when the teller runs out of breath. The arroyo let go of its brown, the culvert bled mud, and the pipe settled from a battle hum to the shy throb of resting steel. The road above steamed like a horse. I climbed back down because that is what my job requires, even when my job has begun asking for more than numbers. The mirrors blinked me into view one by one until the last showed only the dark curve of pipe and a pinprick that might have been daylight or a trick. This time when I touched the steel, I didn't lay a hand flat. I put down a coin. Not a Saint metal eye, don't carry saints in the field. A blue oxidized $50 my grandfather had given me when I signed with the company, a coin older than the radio sonda, older than the culvert, old enough to have crossed palms for coffee in a town where the only thing paved was rumor. I set it on the pipe's crown, right where the hum rose, and stepped back. The coin skittered a fraction and stopped as if the line had taken a breath to consider it. Up above on the dead road, the crack that had burped water dried hard in an instant, salt blooming at the edges like a fever breaking. The Geiger, forgotten and still somehow talking, said one clean tick, not warning, not danger receipt. The Morse in the culvert didn't say stay dry this time. It said nothing at all, and the silence was an answer. In the click still, the woman's Spanish voice came again, closer now, not through the pipe, but in the air between steel and mud. Not a ghost, don't pin that on me. I've got enough trouble with field audits, a memory with a mouth. Pagenlo, she said, as gentle as a bank vault door closing. Pay it, then softer, a name I didn't wear in any office. My own. I'd never heard it pronounced with that accent. It fit me better than the one I use for conference calls. I planted both boots and did the other thing no adult with an expense account admits to. I bent my head. It's paid, I said. For today, for me? My breath made a small cloud, and the pipe grew warm enough under my palm to make me think I had imagined the cold. The mirrors along the roof sent back only my face, lined by sun and argument, otherwise unwilling to dramatize. If there was a ledger, a column moved a mark. Up at the truck, I opened the log and wrote the dry version first. Localized overtopping event. Culvert obstruction likely. CP readings variable during storm. Anchor integrity confirmed. Coding holiday minor at longitudinal seam, scheduled patch. Then, in the wide margin where I usually bully myself to remember a broken fence or a rancher's warning about a bull, I printed smaller, 3 men, 1959, bridge, unpaid, truck down. Road still collecting, leave something. I tucked the radio sonde. Plate, I'd pried free into the satchel with a promise to myself that I would take it. To the little county museum where ladies with exact hair collect the history the county won't. On the walk back to the lip, the Arroyo gave up a tire, then a jack handle, then a foam cooler lid with the ghost of a logo you only see in photographs now. I set the jack handle on the abutment like a cross someone would read wrong and kept moving. The company sent me a text halfway to the yard asking for color on the Agua Negra incident. I typed no impact to service. Will file? They like answers that fit in one line. The sky forgot its temper and sprawled into evening like it hadn't just tried to teach anybody anything. At the edge of the dead road I looked back. The pipe gleamed the dull, perfect gray of a thing that longs to be invisible. The culvert mouth went to shadow. The mirrors, if they kept moving, did so on their own time. In the weeks after, the anomaly I could write down stopped. The Geiger behaved when it had batteries and slept when it didn't. The cathodic protection numbers sang their little song inside spec. But a different kind of record kept making itself. A ranch hand I know found 3 stained bills balled in. Chicken wire along the fence a mile down and left them in a coffee can on the abutment. A high school couple took prom photos at the end of the dead road and came back the next morning to find a row of marbles set, like a catechism along the crack that had burped water. Some nights when the wind comes from the west with rain on its breath, the highway up above lulls into a tune that has no words but makes my back teeth remember a woman who never worked for us telling boys, with dirty fingernails, that paydays aren't favors. I didn't tell the company any of that. What I did do, against the hard training of men who never want to be seen talking to dirt, was make a habit. Once a month I drive to the end of that orphan road. I set a coin or a button or the bead from a snapped lanyard on the pipe crown, and I say nothing. If it's been a wet week, I turn and leave a folded 5 under a flat rock at the culvert mouth where the flood teeth always search first. It's not about ghosts. It's about owing the ground where we bury the long bets that keep our lights on. A ledger is a prayer with numbers. If you find yourself on an abandoned spur and the air drops cold by 10 and the instruments in your cab start acting like they've learned manners, listen, the line may be holding a conversation begun before you were hired. Don't argue with the language it chooses. Don't write what you can't afford to explain. Leave something small that hurt a little to part with. Then get off the dead road before it asks for more than you can settle. The desert remembers. The first version of every deal we made with it, and it collects with interest. People think the desert is empty because it refuses to perform for them. Out here, we keep our names close and the old roads closer. I was born on this reservation, left for a while to wear the Corps' uniform, then came home to wear another. My job, ranger badge or no, is the same one my grandfather did without paperwork: keep fools alive and keep private places private. The Sonoran doesn't have shortcuts. It has paths that belong to storms, cattle and memory, and sometimes those paths decide to eat what doesn't belong. The bypass I'm talking about started as an unauthorized cut weekend warriors in lifted toys. Followed a blog post someone wrote after the monsoon washed a cattle gate flat. They hopped the fence, skirted a closed arroyo, and bragged about saving 20 minutes to the interstate. The county and our council sealed it with rock and reclamation mesh. Then the sinkholes opened. We closed it again with chain and bar signs that don't care if you can afford gas. That should have been the end. April afternoon, heat like a hand on the back of your neck. I got a call from a cousin who runs a roadside fruit stand on the paved road. 2 off-roaders went in at the bypass, she said. Haven't come out. Left this on the dash. She sent a photo, a printed map, sun faded to the color of dried blood. Yellow highlighter tracing a line that no longer existed. In the margin, someone had written, "Shortcut locals use this." With an arrow and a smile that made me tired, I rolled my unit to the fence line. The padlock was snapped, chain tossed like a dead snake. Tracks led in 2 rigs, knobby tires, fresh. The air smelled of hot rubber and creosote, and underneath something sweet and wrong, like flowers pressed in a Bible. I killed the engine and listened. The desert says a lot if you don't interrupt. Doves, bees, wind through cholla. Farther in, a slow sigh like the sound a crowd makes after the anthem Relief. Grief, something between. I followed the ruts through 2 low saddles to the place the ground goes soft. Saguaros rose like judges, rib shadows like vertical clock faces. A depression the size of a baseball diamond sat where the bad bypass crosses a buried spring. Perfect circle, rim tossed up white. At its edge, the 2 off-roaders, doors open, radios muttering to themselves with nobody on the other end. Halfway into the circle stood the drivers, hip-deep and grinning like they'd won something. That expression shock wrapped in relief told me the ground was lying to them. "It's shallow," one called, waving like I'd arrived with party food. He had the sunburn of a man who thinks hats are for other people. We almost got through. Just need a tug. I took a slow lap around the rim, keeping weight light, reading the surface. My boot sank an inch, then came up with paper stuck to the tread, brown, fibrous, veined like leaves. I squatted and pinched a piece between finger and thumb. Not leaves. Map layers of it laminated together with dust and something mineral. The pit smelled like sunblock and gasoline and salt, none of which should have been here. When the wind shifted, it brought other sense mule sweat, mesquite smoke from a mission kitchen that hasn't boiled since the year my great-grandfather was born. I tested the rim with my baton. The crust dimpled, then smoothed itself over like water in a dish. In the center, the men laughed too loudly. "Don't come in," I said. "Drop your packs. Toss your belts. It's the first rule in a sink. Lighten what the ground can grab." "We're okay," the older one said. "It's only mud." He tried to lift his knee and the surface kissed his thigh, leaving a pale print the shape of a highway shield. The younger one held up his phone like a talisman. The screen showed a map app with a straight highlighted line crossing unbroken beige. "It says we're good," he shouted, like the desert was bound by terms and conditions. There's a tone I take when a recruit points a rifle at his own boot. "I used it. It says what you told it to say," I replied. "Now listen to me. You came onto a road that isn't yours. The ground knows the first lines. It doesn't like your edits." At the rim, my baton touched something under the crust. It wasn't rock. It wasn't water. It was paper, many layers thick, flexing like lungs. The surface quivered to a rhythm I recognized from church drums and thunderheads, slow, old, patient. This road had eaten maps until it learned to breathe with them. The sun slid behind a cloud. Shadows of saguaro arms pointed inward like arrows. The pit brightened not with light, but with attention. The men sank another inch and didn't notice. I called it in one code for possible entrapment, another for trespass I would ignore if they lived. The radio crackled like it didn't want to carry my words across that circle. I checked my rope, checked my knife, and told the ground, I see you. Sometimes that's all you can say before the deal starts. You don't win a tug-of-war with a sink that eats paper for breakfast. You give it a new path to swallow. I clipped a rescue line around a saguaro rib soft enough to crush if you're careless. Strong enough to hold a truck if you respect angles, and belly crawled toward the two men, spreading my weight with elbows and hips. The crust accepted me the way thin ice accepts a fox, skeptical, listening. Drop your packs, I said again. The younger one obeyed, panic cracking through his grin. The older one didn't. He clutched his phone and a hydration bladder like they were his children. Do you know where you are? I asked, eyes on his hands. State land, he said, like a guess he hoped I'd grade on a curve. We checked a forum. It's my land, I said, voice quiet. And our people's roads went through here before your forums learned to spell. We closed this cut because the spring underneath learned a bad habit when someone carved a shortcut across its back. It eats what it's fed. A flare in the body remembers drill field cadence count and step and breathe, and I used that rhythm to slide another foot closer. The surface under my chest felt like braille, letters pressing up in layered pulp. My hand came away dusted with pigments charcoal ochre, the green of old mimeographs. When I held that dust to my nose, I smelled centuries, mission ink, surveyor's sweat, toner from a cheap county office copier, and the sour fear of a family's first road trip after a layoff. The pit exhaled. 1,000 paper edges lifted and settled with the sound of a shuffling congregation. The maps revealed themselves by strata. At the top, glossy tourist handouts with cartoon coyotes and discounts on fry bread and fuel. Below those, Forest Service grids, righteous green, and labels that pronounce without asking. Below those, Spanish Camino annotations in a practiced hand, the lowercase s that curves like a snake. Under that, our people's trails notched into bark and bone, lines you feel with your feet more than see with your eyes. Each layer pulsed as if reading its own instructions. The younger man's face cracked into confusion. He looked down and finally saw what he was standing in. It's paper? He whispered. How? His hands went to the rope I slid across. He grabbed like a man falling off a roof. Paper and promise, I said. And you walked in with a new promise you printed this morning. The ground is always hungry for new rules. He nodded, tears cutting clean tracks through dust on his cheeks. He unbuckled his belt and I took the weight into the line. The pit tightened around his thighs. The print it left when he shifted was unmistakable, faded root numbers ghosting his skin. Don't fight, I told him. You fight, it learns your shape. The older one lifted his phone higher. The screen showed a blue dot floating over beige like a saint over a cloud. He pressed the power button. When the screen went black, the pit near his hips brightened, the way water lightens when you scull too close to the surface. He laughed, stagey. I'm fine, he said. This is a story we'll tell at the bar. I had a bar for him, the one I'd used to pry his hands off a bad decision. I popped a flare. Red washed over the pit and threw the layers into relief. The light turned the printed lines into capillaries. Under my elbows, the oldest paths glowed like coals. The younger man shuddered. The older one stared past the light into a distance only he could see. It's showing me the highway, he said, voice gone soft with the narcotic of wrong salvation. It's right there. I just have to step. He shifted weight as if to climb an imaginary curb. The ground took his calf in one slow sip. Look at me, I told him, pulling command up from a place I thought I'd retired with the uniform. Name, age, who's waiting for you? He dragged his gaze to me as if it weighed more than he did. Aaron, he said. 47. My sister? Her boys? Good, names make lines to pull on. Okay, Aaron, I said. You will drop the pack. You will toss the phone. You will look at my hands and only my hands. He didn't, he looked at the map. The pit, helpful, eager like a dog that brings the wrong ball, showed him a perfect lane. 2 yellow lines wide, leading out. My flare hissed lower. The red bled to pink. The younger man moaned. The rope burned my glove through. I did something the report would never hold. I took out my kabar, the knife that kept me whole longer than any chaplain ever did, and cut a shallow channel from their bodies to the rim, dragging the blade just deep enough to invite. The ground likes a path. Give it one that isn't you. The slit I made filled with paper slurries, map fragments sailing like leaves on first rain. Follow my elbows, I said. Not your feet. Crawl like you're under concertina. The younger one moved. Good soldier, that one. He obeyed fear in the right direction. The older one hesitated, captivated by a lane that didn't belong in this century. He whispered, "It'll take me faster." The ground agreed, loving him for making it easy. I reached and caught his wrist. The skin was hot where the pit had printed numbers on him. Faster where? I asked. He blinked. A boy lived inside that man, lost, wanting adult permission. Home, he said, not meaning any place a GPS recognizes. The ground pulled. I had one good breath to choose. I let go of his wrist and grabbed his belt, metal buckle against my knuckles, and he cursed like men do when a stranger touches their waist. Pride is a heavy thing to carry in a sink. Look at my knife, I said. See what I'm doing. I'm making the world you want in a line that won't take you. Follow it. He looked. Something inside redirected. He slid, groaning, along the shallow channel I'd carved. The pit, cheated of the bigger prize, took payment instead. The phone went first, swallowed in a neat gulp. Then one boot. Then the pack, which dimpled and drifted and vanished like a memory. My rope sang. My shoulders found old pain and old strength. We moved an inch, another, the ground learned the new path, and grudgingly ate what I fed it behind us, the layers quieted, the old trails dimming to the pulse of a sleeping thing. The flare died with a sigh. The last light painted the Roadrunner on the younger man's t-shirt a color I hadn't seen since I was 10. You can pretend that detail doesn't matter. Out here, the desert indexes everything you notice against everything you owe. We had one more inch to buy. The last yard is always the most expensive. My elbows were raw. Grit had turned to paste with sweat and ground itself into my skin like a tattoo the earth wanted to sign. The rope groaned. The younger man's breath came in short barks. The older man's laugh was gone. In its place, a thin sound I've heard from Marines and mother's anger turned into prayer with no words left. The pit made its final bid. The circle's rim rose a fraction, a lip like a cup about to spill. The surface under the older man's hips tightened, trying to roll him flat, coin him, stamp him with some root designation it preferred. He arched, and that was the moment I had feared. Back muscles fight. Hips sink. I dropped the rope to one hand and shoved both palms under his tailbone, taking a weight I had no business taking at my age. He yelled in a voice that had baseball and porch beers in it. Push, I said, and the younger one did. A good boot to his friend's calf that broke the suction with a farting kiss. We tumbled as a set into the shallow channel. The ground accepted our new course with a grudging shiver, the way a stubborn mule finally takes the bridle. Paper sloughed past tourist cartoons, Forest Service grids, Camino script, our trails as red dust. The rim lowered again, apology or threat I couldn't tell. I got my knees under me and forced backward progress, elbows dragging new lines a palm's width at a time, and then we were out. The crust under our bellies turned to honest dirt. The channel I'd cut ran to the rim and ended in a tidy fan of shredded map and mica dust. The pit kept breathing slower, now pulled toward the path. I'd offered like a dog working a scent it didn't want to give up. We didn't stand yet. We rolled onto our backs and counted stars to tell our bodies the sky was still there. The younger one cried without sound. The older one stared at the circle like a man looking at an open grave that had briefly considered his name, and decided to wait for a better stone. When the adrenaline stopped chewing my heartbeat, I sat them up and checked for harm. The older man's thigh wore an imprint of numbers and broken lane lines, pale against the sunburn as if the pit had pressed a root into him. It would fade. Or it wouldn't. I've seen the desert right in ways the city doctors can't scrub. Why did it do that? The younger one asked, voice too big in the quiet. He looked at the pit with the awe of a child who has just learned the stove is not a friend. Because it's made of promises, I said. Old ones. Bad ones, good ones. You brought a fresh lie to a place that runs on truth older than asphalt? It took what it could. He wiped his face. We didn't mean, he started. I cut him off gently. Meaning doesn't keep you above ground. You'll help me put the chain back, I said. You'll pay for the lock you cut. And you'll not come here again. If you need to save 20 minutes, leave 20 minutes earlier. The older one laughed once, broken. It showed me the road home, he said. For a second, I swear it was right there. I nodded. It shows everyone a road they already believe in. That's how it feeds. We walked back to the trucks careful as men leaving a church after a funeral they almost attended. At the fence, we hung a new chain, my lock. I wrote a number on their palms with a Sharpie, the office, the council contact so they could call and confess with money. The younger one pressed his remaining boot heel into the dust as if to make an honest print after so many dishonest ones. Good instinct. Before I left, I did what my grandfather did and my father didn't teach me because some lessons prefer to arrive sideways. I gathered scraps the pit had coughed at the Rima corner of a tourist map with a cartoon roadrunner, a square of Forest Service grid, a fragment of Camino script that said no in a hand like a priest's laid them under a flat rock just outside the circle, and placed a silver button from my uniform on top. Payment isn't money. It's respect measured in small loss. Council put up a better barrier the next week. We sank fence posts deeper, poured cement collars, and hung signs in English, Spanish, and Oatham that said close sink hazard no paso. For 3 days the chain held. On the 4th, the signs turned themselves just so, angling inward in a way that would convince a certain kind of driver that this was the notch into the shortcut. I didn't straighten them. The desert speaks in its own punctuation. The off-roaders came to the office with hats in hands and checks that cleared. I shook their hands and took their bad maps. I told them to spend their weekends on marked trails or none at all. Our roads are not your stories, I said without raising my voice. A month passed. A monsoon pounded the spring. The circle breathed higher, then gentled. When the wind shifts right, you can read the exposed edges, our people's trails, the Spanish renamings, the federal rectangles, the cartoon coyotes winking like devils who know they're adorable. Every road replaces a road. The first one remembers. It resents the edit. If you're out here and a fence suggests a shortcut, hear me. The Sonoran is generous until it isn't. Maps are not permission. They're prayers someone else said for you. When the ground asks for a toll, pay something small, you'll miss a button. A coin, a story you were about to tell about how brave you were. Then turn around. The quickest way home is the long way that lets you